Welcome to Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us, the Telegraph's football reporter Sam Dean and the Mirror's chief sports writer Andy Dunn. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run you through those back pages. Well, the Telegraph Sport covers Bournemouth's victory over Tottenham on another disappointing night for Ange Postecoglou, and also plenty on the vicious row that's erupted in F1 between George Russell and Max Verstappen. The Mirror has something a little different. They say that Inter Miami want Kevin De Bruyne as David Beckham's franchise dream of another big coup. Plenty on the back page of the Eye as well, covering that Spurs defeat and how Liverpool are gearing up for the Merseyside derby at Goodison on Saturday lunchtime, which I'm sure we will get into with Mr. Dunn. But before we do that, we will start by reflecting on the two games in the Premier League this Thursday evening. A sixth defeat of the campaign for Tottenham. Bournemouth winning at the Vitality by a goal to nil. Dean Hyson with his first in the Premier League, giving Bournemouth another impressive home victory this season. But Sam, we will talk about it first from a Tottenham perspective. An enigma wrapped in a riddle, and the inconsistency goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be absolutely maddening now for Spurs supporters to see the way this team can go from such heights just a few weeks ago to such lows. They've got a very high ceiling and a very low floor right now. And I think the caveat we should probably add in quite early is that they are obviously missing their real defensive spine at the back, with Romero injured, Van de Ven injured, and the goalkeeper Vicario injured too. But I don't think that quite explains the paucity of the performance they put in tonight and the ragged nature of their defending. And if you look at sort of the numbers, the figures, and also just with your eyes, Bournemouth were totally dominant and probably should have scored 3 or 4, if not more, really, in that second half. And Spurs never really got going. And increasingly, and I know it's a big debate among the Spurs fan base now, and I think some Spurs fans are already growing a bit tired of this, but increasingly you're trying to look at this and find that real substantial improvement under Postecoglou in the last 12 months. And it's not always easy to find. And you see these games when they swing to such lows, and you do wonder how much sort of a foundation really exists there in terms of what he's trying to do. So, yeah, very concerning times, but equally, Spurs being Spurs, they might spring back into great form at the weekend.
Yeah, it's almost weird that you would say that having Chelsea at the weekend sort of plays into their hands, given some of the results that they've taken this season. But, Andy, as many defeats as Everton and Crystal Palace this season for Tottenham, and you're sort of struggling to find progress in certain areas, I guess, and this set-piece fragility, which is what the Telegraph touched on as well, comes up to rear its ugly head again.
Yes, and it's funny you should mention that Chelsea might be actually a game that could be favourable for them, because, you know, City clearly played into Tottenham's hands, because, you know, they hit them quick on the counter-attack. They did very similar, very quick against Manchester United in another, you know, sort of, you know, relatively convincing performance this season. It's when they have to impose themselves on other teams you would expect them maybe to get past, you know, without being disrespectful to Bournemouth, but they can't seem to do that. And I think Sam's right. They've got a real issue here in the sense that if, you know, they're what? They're 10th now in the table. I think Bournemouth have just inched ahead of them. 10th in the table. And if they lose touch, which is threatening to happen with that group of 4, the gang of 4 at the top, look at this early stage as though they might be the 4 that finishes in that. So I'm talking Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester City and Chelsea. If Spurs begin to lose touch with that, then there will be pressure on Ange. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He needs to find solutions. He needs to find, as you say, to make them more solid defensively from set pieces. And he needs to find another way of playing where they can impose themselves on a game. They didn't impose themselves one iota on that game tonight. You know, I think it was 12 shots compared to Bournemouth's 21. They might have had more possession, but it wasn't possession in threatening areas. And it's a real issue. And you know, everyone can see what happens. It was so predictable that they would follow up that landmark, what we thought was a landmark win at the Etihad, with a couple of draws and this rather insipid defeat tonight.
And because of that, Sam, does it sort of lead you to think that it's a mentality problem with Tottenham, that there is something within the psyche of that team and that dressing room, that you can be so brilliant at the Etihad, so brilliant at Old Trafford, but as Andy said, so insipid in games which many would expect them to win?
Yeah, well, we're straying dangerously close to sort of Spursiness territory here, but that label
that
does
was going to be a
exist.
pound in the jar for every time anyone uses that word exactly, but I tried to circumnavigate it slightly.
Yeah, but that label exists for a reason, and even just a few weeks ago, I'm sure viewers will remember the extract from Hugo Lloris's book that was serialised in the Guardian, talking about the ownership and Daniel Levy, the chairman, and offering watches out before the Champions League final to say you're a finalist, congratulations, and lacking that winning mentality. So of course, there's been a long-term discussion and issue around that. I'm not convinced that right now it's necessarily a mentality problem. I think they've got an issue with injuries. Fundamentally, is a big one, which I know is a boring one, but it's real. It affects things, and also I'm not sure their summer signings have really clicked in the way they would have hoped. I think Dominic Solanke's had a few games where he's looked quite good, but for £65 million, I think you'd expect quite a lot more than what Spurs are seeing right now. And even young Archie Gray, for example, I mean, not to dig out Archie Gray, he's a very young lad and hardly played at all this season, but that was £40 million worth of investment. And when you watch him tonight, you're not seeing a player who looks totally confident and totally happy with his surroundings. So there are concerns, and you can also look at James Maddison in and out of the team. Is it the happiest camp there? Not sure. Son Heung-min, he's not playing every game, every minute like he used to, partly because of age, because of fitness. But again, is he the player he was a couple of years ago? And there are issues kind of all over the place. But equally, as we said before, they might win 3-0 at the weekend and suddenly we're praising them again. That's just who Spurs are right now.
That's just who we are, as Ange Postecoglou would say. What we've done, and talking of cliches, we've sort of fallen into the trap, Andy, of looking at it from the big six clubs' perspective. But what a job Andoni Iraola has done. As I said, they've already beaten Arsenal and Manchester City at home this season. They've drawn at Villa as well. And he, of the sort of hipster managers, seems to get less praise than some of the other clubs in that middle section, but he's doing a brilliant job.
Absolutely fantastic. He really is. You say he's getting less praise, and also the follow-on from that is that he doesn't get linked with the job. Say someone like Thomas Frank, for example, quite rightly so, was linked with the Manchester United job before Ruben Amorim took over, but not Iraola. But he should be. And bear in mind, the significance, of course, tonight was also that they lost Dominic Solanke, and they've moved on seamlessly. They've collected that money, moved on seamlessly, playing the same style, and they're not one of the clubs that you would think about as being. We think of clubs every year now as relatively automatic strugglers. We think that they're going to be down there, and we're surprised if they're not. Bournemouth aren't one of them, and that's the biggest compliment you can pay the job he's done. He's calm, he's level-headed. He doesn't get carried away. It's an old adage, but he doesn't get carried away in defeats and doesn't get carried away in victory. Hugely impressive job he's doing for that football club.
Also in the Telegraph, it says Fulham soar to sixth as Brighton lament for Brugge and Howler. Fulham just a point behind Brighton now. Another club who deserve a huge amount of credit, Sam, and recruitment-wise, I think it's interesting with Fulham. They've sort of reignited some careers. Emile Smith-Rowe, terrible injury problems at Arsenal. Raul Jimenez, that awful head injury we all remember, scoring goals again at Fulham, having a great season.
Yeah, absolutely. You took the words out of my mouth on recruitment. I think when we look at Premier League clubs who are known as being the best sort of recruiters, I think people look at clubs like Brighton and Brentford who can sort of spot the hidden gems. But what Fulham are doing is very different in the sense that they're taking players from perhaps bigger clubs like Emile Smith-Rowe, for example, or Andres Pereira from Man United. And they're sort of taking punts on people that people were quite underrated. And these guys are doing really well. And what I would say about Fulham as well on the recruitment front, I don't think people quite realise how much change there was and the scale of it this summer. They lost João Palhinha, Tosin Adarabioyo, Bobby Decordova-Reid, Willian and Tim Ream, all in the space of one summer. Now, those players were all getting on a bit. They're all a bit older than, some of them older than 30s, some of them in their late 20s, but they're all very important figures at that club. And to lose so many in one summer, I think would have been a source of concern for some people. But the way they've recruited and the way that Marco Silva's got the team playing, I think is testament to a club that is now incredibly well run and well resourced, and they're doing things properly. And obviously, I think people would agree that wasn't always the case with Fulham, maybe 3 or 4 years ago when they were a bit more unstable and making 11 signings in one summer, they didn't quite pay off. But right now, what they're doing is sensible, it's clever, and it's working really very impressively.
And again, to sort of echo what we were saying about Andoni Iraola, Andy, Marco Silva might be the same sort of category. He doesn't really seem to get linked to big jobs. When he left Everton, there was probably many people thought, quite a lot to prove, and he's proving it emphatically.
He is, he's not always the easiest. He's not always, how should I put it? He's not always the easiest to get on with. He can be quite surly. He's not overly communicative. Of course, he's left clubs in the past in circumstances that maybe haven't been ideal. But yes, you're right. And what he's proved now is he can get the best out of players. And to that list of players that you mentioned before, Rob, I would add Alex Iwobi for starters. I would add Harry Wilson. These are players who are extremely talented, but a lot of managers, well, several managers, let's say, have tried and failed to get the best out of these players. Marco Silva is now getting the best out of them, and again, that's a testament to his coaching ability. As I say, he doesn't. I don't think, and maybe it's a good thing, he doesn't exactly sell himself, in a big time way, and he can be quite combative, with officials, and has fallen foul of that now and again. But no, the job he's doing there is fantastic. Anthony Robinson as well, another one, extremely talented player who he's getting the absolute best out of. Yeah, and again, I can only echo what Sam said. Fulham at the moment, a fantastically run club. I'm not sure I'd pay £100 a seat to watch them in that brand new stand of theirs, but they're doing something right.
You could have a lovely dip in the pool, Andy. You could have a nice Michelin-starred dinner. On your wage as a chief sports writer, you can definitely afford it for sure. Just to pick up on one of the points that Andy made there, Sam, about selling himself, and I think that's a really interesting thing with managers, that Marco Silva, to me, would be in the same category as someone like Nuno doing a great job but doesn't sell himself. And another person that Andy mentioned, Thomas Frank, is very different, very vivacious, tells a joke, and we probably talk about him more than we do the other two.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that's almost like a trap that's quite easy for us in the media to fall into. That I think we like quotable managers who answer our questions in engaging ways, and not that Silva isn't necessarily that man, but I don't think he's someone who goes out there deliberately and tries to put across a certain personality. I think he sees press conferences, like many managers do, as a necessary evil to a degree, and I don't think he's someone who goes out there and thinks, right, here's my message for this week, here's what I want to say. But equally, I think it'd be unfair to sort of suggest that he's bland or dull or boring, and people I know at Fulham don't speak about him in that way at all. And he's clearly also a very good man manager. So the personality element and the charisma, he's got it in spades behind the scenes. It's just whether we in the media should reward that in the same way that we sort of prize someone like Thomas Frank who gives us great quotes. Maybe it's a different debate, but and that's not to undermine Thomas Frank, by the way, who's also an excellent coach.
You're watching Back Pages tonight. The Telegraph's football reporter Sam Dean and the Mirror's chief sports writer Andy Dunn are with us this evening, and there is a lot of coverage, as you'd expect, across the papers of the fallout between Max Verstappen, the Formula One world champion, and George Russell, ahead of the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi. It has to be said, Andy, some of the language that both men are using, it is quite an incredible feud that's broken out.
It's astonishing. It really is. I mean, what I would like to say first on this is that I've dealt with George Russell on several occasions when I've been covering Formula One, and I've found him an extremely level-headed, mature, 25-year-old. He is, it should be noted as well, the current driver who is a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, so he's taken that responsibility. So for him to get involved I was about to call it a spat, but it's way more than a spat. And you know what? It makes great copy for us. It makes great headlines. It's astonishing viewing. It's astonishing audio that you hear from these two. The words that are used, Russell accusing Verstappen of borderline violence, accusing him of being a bully. It is great copy in inverted commas for us. But it's worth remembering that the FIA really must clamp down on this. The FIA, the governing body, surely have to intervene, because don't forget, Formula One is still an incredibly dangerous sport, the most dangerous sport. And if this sort of feud spills over onto the track, there's 18 other drivers on that Grand Prix grid, and they can't allow that to endanger other drivers as well as themselves. So it's an incredibly serious. I know that we can put it down to the end of a season. I know there's so much adrenaline going around and these things can happen. However, what can't happen is for this to carry on over into the track and endanger other people. So I think it's an incredibly serious situation for F1, albeit one that makes Sunday's race absolute must-watch, compelling viewing it should be. Don't forget, 3 years ago, 2021 Abu Dhabi was where Verstappen's reign at the top of Formula One started in incredibly controversial fashion when he won that final race from the race director's intervention, and has won obviously the next 3 on the spin.
Interestingly, Oliver Brown in the Telegraph saying F1 has waited years for such vicious strife for this piece. And it's interesting, Sam, because Martin Brundle, one of our Sky Sports colleagues, has said a lot of the times, particularly with Lando Norris this year, as he becomes the new rival to Verstappen, it all started off quite nicey, and I've got a lot of respect for Max, and they had a bit of a feud after an incident in Austria, and Lando Norris very quickly backed down. But he is very much of the opinion that top-level sport and Formula One needs needle like this.
Yeah, and I think we'd all agree with that. And I definitely take Andy's point that there's another level of edge to this when it involves herring around tracks in super fast cars, and the level of danger involved. You know, in rugby, football, and cricket, you can have feuds, but it doesn't ever really matter in the sense of life or death, whereas F1 it really is, which obviously makes it all the more compelling drama, but also, as Andy says, all the more serious too. And I mean, as a journalist, I'm a sort of professional cynic like most of us, and my instinctive first response seeing this was, I wonder if, you know, this is good cameras, good for the Netflix cameras, and it helps the drama. And one of those, you know, another one of those things that people are sort of throwing at F1 these days for being slightly too happy to gear itself towards that kind of thing. But the more you read about Russell and listening to Andy talk about Russell and how he knows him personally, it does seem very much the case that he isn't the kind of person who would be confecting this in any way or hamming it up for the sake of good drama. I think he seems like an earnest, honest, pretty straight guy. And if this is how he feels, this is what he wants to say, it seems pretty genuine. So absolutely, it's going to be must-watch viewing on Sunday. And Oliver Brown's piece in our paper sort of talking about the need for this kind of feud. He makes the point that in the last 10 years or so, a lot of these racers have been living in the same social circles and, you know, going shopping in Monte Carlo and knowing the same people. And it's all become perhaps a bit too nicey to. So to have this sort of edge, obviously within reason, as we've discussed, is a welcome thing, I think, for viewers and probably for the drivers too.
It's so interesting, though, that some of the things that George Russell says, Andy, you would say that he has a point, but it's very down to perception as to whether you see it and could take it as a compliment, that calling Max Verstappen a bad loser who doesn't react well when things don't go his way could arguably be one of the traits that makes him a four-time world champion.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the traits of every world champion out there. But what's also interesting, though, Rob, is that what George has also said today, and obviously don't forget this weekend is significant in it's Lewis Hamilton's final Grand Prix in a Mercedes car. What he's also said is that Lewis Hamilton is the role model that kids should be looking up to. Lewis Hamilton is a gold star role model, he says. Now, yes, he's had his good and his bad. Has he ever crossed the line? George Russell says that Verstappen crossed the line. But I see what you're saying. And also don't forget Lando Norris today, when he said that, you know, what Verstappen is guilty of most of the time is actually speaking the honest truth or the brutal truth that people might not like, suggests to me that some of these drivers might be on Verstappen's side. It's fascinating because this new breed of drivers all grew up together. They were karting together 10, 12 years ago. I'm talking Verstappen, I'm talking Norris, Charles Leclerc, George Russell. So these things go back to when they were 12, 13 years of age. And yes, don't forget in Formula One, milliseconds count. So getting that edge from being like Verstappen is, you could argue, is what's made him world champion 4 times on the spin.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall of that driver's dinner this evening. I think that would have been fascinating stuff. Let's get to the Mirror, an exclusive from Jeremy Cross. Sam, landed a free. Great headline. David Beckham's Inter Miami have made Kevin De Bruyne their #1 transfer target, with the American MLS club growing increasingly confident of being able to land the Manchester City superstar next summer. You would say it is a big summer of change potentially ahead at Manchester City. Do you see this as a potential destination for De Bruyne then?
Well, I can't claim to know De Bruyne's intentions, but I can certainly imagine why there would be an appeal of going to Miami and playing there. And we've seen the appeal of that already to quite a few high-profile players, as we know, with Messi there, Suarez there, Busquets. It's clearly a nice place to play. You've got David Beckham there, the glam, the lifestyle. sure the money's quite nice too. And for De Bruyne, who's obviously had these injury issues in the last year and this season, dealing with this slightly unusual hernia hip type problem, which is just causing him quite a lot of pain and quite a lot of grief. And at his age too, it does seem like the end might be coming for him in terms of the Premier League. Obviously, you wouldn't bet against him sort of leading City to another title, even from this far back, given the quality of the player. But it does feel like it's heading in that direction. And yeah, Inter Miami, if I was 34 and wanting a new life and a new chapter in my career, I think Miami would be quite high up my list. So I can certainly see why it might be high up De Bruyne's list too.
Great vision. Sam Dean in Miami, Andy Dunn in the swimming pool at Craven Cottage. It's quite the pairing we've got here. And as I said, Andy, it does feel like this could be a big summer ahead for Manchester City. And there have been signs that maybe this is an era that is perhaps more rapidly than we all thought coming to an end.
Yeah, quite possibly. Certainly, again, though, in this day and age, it's quite easy when things are going wrong to turn around and highlight the fact that they've got players who are 30 or in the 30s. But on the other hand, we talk a lot, and we talk about it, example, in terms of the likes of Mohamed Salah. These players now can play on for a lot longer. And in De Bruyne's case, I can absolutely, into Miami, I'm sure would love him. But, if as Sam says, he comes back now and he leads a City fight back after their slump, then City will be wanting him to stay longer. And if not, City will want him probably to stay somewhere within the City football group at one of their clubs, I would imagine. But you're right. But I think it's still a bit early to sort of say that this is a City team that has basically reached a point where it's gone over the hill. I don't think that's the case. I think we'll find it out in the next 3 or 4 months. Just
very quickly to finish us off then, Andy, tee us up for the final Merseyside derby at Goodison Park on Saturday lunchtime.
It's just a shame it's not under light. It's going to be the start of the grand farewell to the grand old lady of a stadium, and it could be a turning point in Everton's season. Let me tell you, I was writing about past Merseyside derbies. One in 1994 when Duncan Ferguson scored a goal. Everton had 4 points from their opening 12 games. Joe Royle came back to manage it. Duncan Ferguson scored the first in a 2-0 win over Liverpool. Everton stayed up, won the cup that year. And this could be the turning point that Everton are looking for.
There you go. Dunn tips Everton to win the cup. What a way to leave it. Thank you very much, Andy. Sam, we will leave you to go and have a look at Villas in Miami as well. Thank you both indeed for your company.